Hello, welcome to the House of Truth. We're continuing our examination of the life of Paul, so we can understand the teachings, the words of Paul. And last week we looked at the strategy of Paul and how his strategy in spreading the gospel. Now it was based on the strategy that Yeshua had laid out, Jesus, when he sent his disciples out two by two in pairs in Jerusalem to spread the gospel among the cities of Jerusalem. Today we're gonna look at the work of Paul. We're like what he did, what did he do to earn money for himself? What did this ministry work look like, and what was his work ethic? So, without further ado, we're going to start Acts 17, 15 through 17. And they that conducted Paul brought him into Athens, and receiving a commandment unto Timothy and Silas for to come to him with all speed, they departed. While Paul waited for them at Athens, his spirit was stirred him. He saw the city wholly given to idolatry. Therefore, disputing the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the market daily with them that met with him. Okay. First thing I want you to know is they. It's not Silas and Timothy. So when Paul fled Berea this time, some people went with him. He now has people he's converts, people he's brought into faith, involving themselves in a deeper level in the ministry. And he's using these people as messengers. There's no texting back in the ancient world. There's not even a postal service like we think of. So this is how Paul gets letters around. He relies on individuals like this helping him. And he sent back this commandment for Timothy to come with him, son Timothy, come with him as quick as they could. Now he's at Athens. There's some things you ought to know about Athens. The country we call Greece today was made of 3 Roman provinces. One was Macedonia, one was Achaia. We looked at, and Epirus is the third one. Well, the capital of Macedonia, Athens today is the capital of Greece. But back in that day, Athens was part of Achaia, and Achaia. It's the coastal Greeks, remember. Achaia includes the Peloponnese and Athens. Athens is not the capital of Achaia, but it is the cultural capital of Greece. It is the religious capital of Greece. Athens was started by Pericles, and Pericles started Athens, and also Athens was the first real city-state. The other Greek city-states kind of modeled after Athens. And Athens is where philosophy was born. This is where the philosophers met. It's the education center of the ancient world. Still was. Many of the Roman emperors sent their children to Athens to be educated. It's the entertainment. It's where plays were first. It's the entertainment capital of the ancient world. Many of the famous plays of the day, were first done in Athens. In fact, Athens, Euripides is the father of playwrights. So he's from Athens. Athens is where plays began. So Athens but here's the thing about Athens. Here's all that thing expresses itself. It's also the religious center of the Greeks, and which is wholly given to idolatry. It's almost a little bit of an understatement. It had more idols than anywhere else in the world, and this bothered Paul. Now, as his pattern was, he went first to the Jews, who knew the synagogue of the Jews. Always starts there. Notice his pattern. The Jews, the people who know the Torah, who grew up with it, the devout persons. Those God-fearers we talked about before. Gentiles who have been sitting in the back of the synagogue listening, who've turned from idol worship to worship God, who have not been circumcised. They know something. Then in the market, them met him. He's now talking to the idol worshipers there. The people who know nothing. This totally makes sense. This is his pattern everywhere he goes. Go to the people who know the most, then the people who know something, then the people who know nothing. So, and remember, he's not just sent to the apostles, he's an apostle to the Jews as well. Do you remember the commission that Yeshua gave him? Now, these Jews in Athens, why he's disputing there with them? Why he's so upset is because the Jews in Athens were the most assimilated Jews in the world. They didn't wear they weren't wearing they didn't wear any distinctive clothing. They may have not even distinguished themselves in eating and not eating unclean food and all this. Their main thing was they only thing really distinguished from the other Athenians was they met in the synagogue on Sabbath. That was about it. They're the Reformed Judaism of the ancient world. So they are just going along with this idolatry. Athens is maybe 2 or 3% Jewish at this time, and they're going along with this. And of course, the Gentiles who learned from them aren't well, they don't know any better, to be honest. But he starts in the synagogue with those two groups. But this thing in the market is daily. Daily is new. This is the Agora. It's famous. It's not just a market. It's like the market of the ancient world. The Agora in Athens was very large. I visited the ancient Agora. I used to live in Athens. And there's still an Agora there, but not on the location of the ancient one. And if you can't find it in the Agora for sale somewhere, it probably doesn't exist. I mean, the Agora was pretty amazing. Well, so, but the Romans had this system of they want all debates, those kind of things, political discussions, etc., outside where everyone can hear them, because they're concerned about conspiracies. Now, remember, in the Juris Judaica, the law of the Jews, they made an exception for schools, like philosophy schools of any kind. Julius Caesar declared the synagogues to be schools, so they're called shul today. All right. Anyways, I spaced it. Anyway, that's what they're called in Yiddish. So, but everyone else had to meet outside in the market or the forum. The Romans made special places just for this called forums. Big outdoor areas, people would debate or whatever. But when they have a forum, people do it in the market. In front of someone being on their soapbox, they may not have been literal soapboxes, but they did the same sort of thing. There'd be little areas that were empty that didn't have a shop. Someone would get up there, put something, stand up on it, and start talking to whoever would listen. So this is what Paul's doing. 6 days a week, he is out there disputing with whoever will listen to him in the market. And these people he's disputing with are idol worshippers. The other day, he is disputing in the synagogue with the Jews on the Sabbath. Why work ethic? With the ministry. But as we'll see, that's not where his work ethic ends. Okay, let's look at the effect that Paul's disputing had. Acts 17, 18 through 21. Then certain philosophers of the Epicureans and the Stoics encountered him. And some said, "What will this babbler say?" Others said, He seems to be a setter forth of strange gods. Because he preached them Jesus and the resurrection. They took him and brought him to Areopagus, saying, "May we know this new doctrine whereof you speakest? Where you speak is? For you bring strange things to our ears, and we would know what these things mean. For all Athenians and strangers which spent their time there, nothing else, but to tell or to hear some new thing. Okay, remember, Athens is the center of philosophy. And you got a couple of competing schools here. We're in this, the Epicureans followed a guy called Epicurus, his philosophy. And his philosophy was basically, you only live once, go for the gusto. The chief end of life is pleasure. Get as much of it as you can while you can. The opposite of them, their rival school, or the opposite school, was the Stoics. The Stoics believed in just avoiding emotion altogether, avoiding the invoke emotion, so you could think clearly. The Stoics are who the Vulcans in Star Trek were modeled after. So he's got these two schools here. Now, this accusation, therefore, the strange gods, is an accusation. Paul's on trial here, and the problem is, Athens had so many gods they made a death penalty crime to introduce any more idols, any more gods. And the reason why I think he's introducing a god, because he's talking about Jesus and the resurrection. In their myths, they had some superficially similar sounding things. So they think he's introduced, but they don't know that this name Jesus is new to them. Yeshua, Jesus in Greek. They haven't heard this. So this is not some metaphor for Zeus or some stupid thing, or come from Zeus or some stupid thing like some people said. This is someone they've never heard of. Zeus, they're very familiar with. He's not preaching to him Zeus, he's preaching to Yeshua, or in Greek, Jesus. So Areopagus is Mars Hill. It's called that because the marble there it's up there, it's up high. It's like a little bald knob. There's no vegetation. There's big marble, natural marble dome. It's area on top of this hill, and it's red, so they associate it with Mars, the war of God. So it's called Mars Hill, and that's where they had these trials. And the people who put them on trial, the Epicureans and the Stoics, they are facing towards the Parthenon, the famous Parthenon in Greece. Paul, the accused, is in their back, and behind him is a crowd gathered who's, want to hear the proceedings. So they want to know what this means. And I lived in Greece, and this is absolutely true. To this day, the Athenians and the people there always want to know everything's new, good by virtue of being new. If you say something that they haven't heard of, they want to hear more about it. And if they got something, then they'll go look for someone they hadn't heard about to tell them. I have found in my travels that as people groups, people of the same ethnicity in the same location, as a group, really do not change. I mean, 2,000 years later, the Athenians are acting the exact same way. So, let's see what Paul does about this accusation, how he answers it. We're going to start off here. Acts 17, 22 through 26. Then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, "Ye men of Athens, I perceive in all things you are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotions, I found an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. Whom therefore you ignorantly worship, him I declare unto you. God made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwells not in temples made with hands, neither is worship with men's hands, as though he needed anything. Seeing he gives to all life and breath and all things, and has made of all blood, of one blood all nations of men, for to dwell on the face of the earth, as determined at the times appointed in the boundaries of their habitation. So Paul's response to this accusation is, first of all, literally says too religious, too given over to idols. Remember, they're obsessed with idols here. Too religious. Who's he address? He doesn't just address, notice, the philosophers, you men of Athens. He's talking to everyone. He's talking to the whole crowd that's behind him as well. And what does he tell them? He reminds them they have this God who they know exists, but they don't know who he is. And Paul says, that's who I'm preaching to you. You've been worshiping ignorance, worshiping him ignorantly, not knowing who he was. But now I'm telling you who he is. And he goes on to tell about this God. This is not like the Greek gods. This God made everything. And he's the Lord of heaven and earth. He doesn't need a temple like the one that's right behind that as judges can see, the Parthenon, the temple of Athena, that Athens is named after. He doesn't need that temple to live in. He doesn't need men. He doesn't need men to feed him and appease him and do various things like went on at the temple of Athena. With people with their hands to do things for him. Now, the last thing I want to drill in is this very important thing, particularly in our times that we live in today, that all men, nations of men, all ethnic groups came from one blood. There's only one race, the human race. Yes, there's differences, but they're superficial differences. Which shade of brown we are, and hair color and eye color and various things like that. There's only one race, the human race. We all came from first Adam, then Noah. And God owns the whole earth. That's what Paul's telling them. And he decides who lives where. The Greeks are in Greece because God placed them there. So now Paul has thoroughly answered their accusation. And watch what he does next. Acts 17, 27 through 31. Now they should seek the Lord, if happily might feel after him and find him, though he not be very far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your poets have said. For we are also his offspring. So much then that as we are the offspring of God, we ought to not think that God is like the silver or gold or stone graven by art and man's device. In the times of this ignorance, God winked at, but now commands all men everywhere to repent, because he appointed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he has ordained. Wherefore he has given assurance to all men, and they raised him from the dead. Paul is totally flipping this on them. Paul's no longer on trial. He's alerting them that they are. And remember, he's telling them, I'm telling you about this God you've been worshiping and don't know anything about. Now I'm telling you about him. So, first Paul starts off with, shows the education of Paul. He starts off by quoting one Greek poet, for in him we live and move and have our beings, a quote from a Greek poet. And then he quotes another one, we're also his offspring. So he's saying this unknown God, you're the offspring of this unknown God. And Adam was begat by God. It says, I believe it's the genealogy of Luke. So physically, we all came from God. God made the first man. So because we are made in the image of God, we should not think that he is like these idols made of gold and silver and stone. God made us. We didn't make him. This is Paul's. Now Paul tells him, God in the past winked at your ignorance, overlooked it. But now that you know better, he's commanding you to repent, to turn from these idols. And you can be certain he will judge he will judge those who don't. The reason to be certain is because he raised the judge, Yeshua, from the dead. Well, let's look at the effects Paul's notification of these people that they're on trial has on them. Acts 17:32 through 34. When they heard the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. Others said, "We will hear thee again of this matter." So Paul departed from among them. Howbeit certain men clave unto him and believed, among which was Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Okay, so so we got three kinds of responses here. Some just mock it. The resurrection of the dead, they just mock. They're in the unbelieving category. But there's this other group. They're not really believers yet, but they're skeptical. They want to know more. They're seekers. Okay. They haven't thrown it out completely, but they want some more details. But there's a third group, and that's those that believe. Now remember, these are all idol worshippers, or in these cases, the ones that believe, former idol worshippers. And one of them is one of the judges. An Areopagite is a judge up there on Mars Hill. This woman named Damaris was no ordinary woman. Normally, only men could be there. Women had to be like in the back of the crowd. Even the crowd, the women were in the back, the women in the front, that kind of thing. This woman, Damaris, was of such reputation, held in such high esteem in Athens, that they let her actually be up there. She couldn't talk, only the men could do that, but she could sit there and witness proceedings, and she could even talk if they allowed her, if they called on her to. So she's like in Cherokee, there's a beloved woman. She's like that, held in very high esteem. And some others, these others are from the crowd. So Paul's flipping this thing. The whole thing was effective, but this is obviously some intention and persecution here for Paul. They tried to get him trialed to be killed. So let's look at Paul how Paul responds to that. Acts 18:1 through 4. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth. And a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was the same craft, he abode with them and wrought by their occupation and worked. For by their occupation they were tent makers. They reasoned the Sabbath every synagogue and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. Okay, so Paul followed the instructions of Yeshua once again, his usual pattern. When you're persecuted in one city, go to another. All did this. Now remember, Timothy and Silas was to meet him there, but he's left believers there. Undoubtedly gave them instructions to tell Timothy and Silas to meet him in Corinth when they got there. When he's there, he comes across this Jewish couple. And one's from Pontus, which is the next province over from Bithynia. So Paul's not going to go there, didn't get to go there, Bithynia, because the Holy Spirit directed him this way. But now he's got connection to someone over in that same area. And we'll see that later, God does send someone to Bithynia, just not Paul. The reason why him and Aquila means eagle, by the way. The reason why they're there in Corinth is this. A little bit of information about Corinth will help you understand. Corinth was 50% Jewish. It's a fairly large city. It's a pretty large city, and it's 50% Jewish. It's maybe as much as 250,000 people or something like that. It's the capital of Macedonia. I'm sorry, that's Thessaloniki. It's the capital of Achaia. And here's the thing: the Jews of Corinth are sharply different than the Greeks of Corinth. I mean, they speak the same language; they got that in common, but the way they dress and stuff, they are very Jewish. You don't mistake one for the other. They're the exact opposite of the Jews in Athens. The Corinthians, we'll look into more detail when our next lesson. But the Corinthians are very much into idol worship, and their behavior is very bad, even by the standards of pagans in many regards. So there's a sharp divide, 50% Jewish, sharp divide between them and the Greeks. So because it's 50% Jewish, that's why Priscilla decided to go there. Pontus is way off, too far. They went. This is about the closest place they can go and be outside of Italy. So, in Claudius, this is a historical fact. It's around 50 AD. He commanded the Jews to depart from Rome. It really happened. The Jews lived in a quarter, a small area that made about 5% of the Roman population in Rome. They lived in a small corner near the Colosseum. They kind of started having riots. And Romans hate riots. And they over as one historian said, a slave named Chrestus. Well, some other historians clarify that. Chrestus is this guy's interpretation. This Roman who doesn't know what's going on, meaning he means Christ, Messiah. Remember, Yeshua said, I've come not to bring peace but a sword, to bring division. Well, they're divided over Christ and having riots, which we've seen many times with Paul, angry mobs and the like. So and if you remember at the persecution of Stephen, believing Jews went as far as Rome. Okay, so Paul's not the only one doing some work here. So Claudius' solution, because normally a lot of times when there was a riot, the Romans just destroy the whole town or something. Well, they can't do that with Rome. So the solution is he tells all the Jews to leave. That's why they're there. Now, he and them have the same work. They do the same kind of work. So he's going to go in business with these people. He's going to partner with them. And their occupation was tent makers. And we're going to look at that. We're going to look at that a lot more closely here in a few minutes. But the Greek word is skenopos. Skenopois. There we go. Skenopois made scenes, literally, like theater scenes. As we get the word scene, like in a movie, like in a theater with a live theater with a play, comes from. And the reason why, and the scenes were originally just it was just a small tent that the actors went in and changed their clothing, and also brought things that changed the set. Well, as things became more sophisticated, the Greeks made improvements. They made the back of that tent they could change it out, connect things to it to change the scene. Well, eventually it reached out across the whole stage and behind the whole stage. So that was the scene. So they were called. So literally, he made scenes for plays. However, this thing can also have the connotation of a tent. A tent maker is also called a skenoipos. A skenoipos makes a skena, a scene. The reason is that word for the scene came from the Hebrew word for mishkan, the tabernacle. Jews were involved in this. Were involved in the Greek theater from very early on as scene makers, and they were originally tent makers. Remember, it was originally a tent, so it still applies to people who are called tent makers. And there's a third thing that were made by these people with that title, with that name. So we're going to look at all three here in a little bit, and see which one they were doing applied to Paul. What his work for money really was. Now I want you to notice again, same as always. He starts in the Sabbath in the synagogue. When? On the Sabbath. Persuades the Jews and Greeks. Remember, he's just in the synagogue at this point. That's the Jews. He's persuading Jews and Greeks that know something. The righteous among the Gentiles, the God-fearers. Those uncircumcised Gentiles who have turned from idol worship. Okay, now before I proceed any more with that, we're gonna look at this tent. We're gonna look at this tent. We're gonna look at this occupation, and we're gonna look at some evidence for which of the three it was. And first, we're gonna start with the scene. You know, and here's some evidence. Here's some evidence that maybe it could have been a scene. It could have been a scene maker. Acts 9:5, and he said, "Who art you, Lord?" And the Lord said, "I am Jesus whom you persecuted. It is hard for you to kick against the pricks." This expression, "it's hard for you to kick against the pricks," is a quote from a Greek play by Euripides. I mean, Yeshua could have used all kinds of Hebrew metaphor stuff, but why pick this one? Because Paul's familiar with it. So Paul does have some sort of contact with theater. He's very familiar with this famous saying. And what it was in the play by Euripides, there was a guy who was doing something the harder he fought against, the harder he fought against, resisted, the more trouble he got. In this play, a guy says it's hard for him to kick against the pricks. What there's a reference to is the Greeks behind their ox or mule, whichever, when they're plowing, behind the animal's foot, about a foot or two behind it, so it wouldn't hit it by accident. They had a pole, and that pole was wrapped around with a thorny vine. So the animal tried to kick at the plowman. It would kick against those thorns. Eventually, the animal would learn not to try to kick. So that's what. So, but remember though, this is a quote from a Greek play. Paul obviously has some knowledge of Greek plays, and we're going to see some more evidence of this here in 1 Corinthians 1:15 through 33. Do not be deceived. Evil communications corrupt good manners. Evil communication corrupts good manners is another quote from another Greek play by Euripides. Now, in this case, the better translation would be, evil company destroys good morals. We talked. This is why it's so important to surround yourself with the right people, the right kind of people. Surround yourself with the wrong kind of people, you're going to be drug off. They're going to influence you to do the wrong thing. It's just a fact, okay? But where Paul tells them this, he's telling the Corinthians this, where they're not far from Athens, and these Greek theaters are everywhere. The Romans adopted them. The Romans adopted them as well. So you got the amphitheaters. Corinth has a large Greek population. They have this Greek theater. So they're very familiar. They're perhaps very familiar with this expression. But the point is, Paul's very familiar with it. So there's some evidence that Paul maybe was involved in scene making. Where he was from, where he was from, Tarsus, also had a large theater, was known for it. So it's possible Paul learned scene making. Now, as far as actual tent making goes, we're going to look at for any kind of clue about that. And the only evidence we got here is 2 Corinthians 5:1-4. It's the only place that mentions anything in connection with Paul in tents, other than we're looking where it says he's a tent maker. Let's see what it says. For we know that if our earthly house of this tabernacle were dissolved, we have a building of God, and a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan, earnestly desired to be clothed upon with our house which is from heaven. If so that being clothed we shall not be found naked. For in this tabernacle we do groan, being burdened, though we not be unclothed, but clothed upon, then mortality might be swallowed up of life. Okay, it's the only reference Paul makes to tents. In all of his writings, the only reference in Acts, other than the one where he's a tent maker. And he compares the human body that we have now as a tent, a temporary dwelling, because these bodies are temporary. Yeshua tarry enough for each of us, for most of us, we're going to leave these bodies one day. Even when we leave them, we're not going to, even if we meet him in the air, these bodies are going to be gone. These bodies are temporary. So that's the only reference Paul makes to tent. So maybe he's a little familiar with tents. And the people in Corinth certainly have some sort of connection there. But remember, Paul's mostly going to urban areas we've looked at. There's not a lot of market for tents necessarily. The market's more for caravans, these larger tents. There's two main types of tent. These large tents, like you've seen sheiks or whatever wear, caravans. Maybe people sell maybe you've seen people sell things at a craft fair like the Clothesline Fair in Prairie Grove. Or the smaller tents, kind of like pup tents, whatever the people live in, the people stay in. Most of the tents are one of those two sizes. Okay. And it'd be difficult to carry the material around and so on and so forth for them. And the tools be a little bulky too. So it's possible he did that. But there's a third possibility, and we're going to look at that. And it requires a little study to see it, so an explanation. So we're going to look at that one. And our first clue here is in Acts 16, 12 through 15. From there to Philippi, which is the chief city of that part of Macedonia, a colony. We went to the city by certain days. On the Sabbath, we went down to the river. We went out of the city by a riverside where prayer was known to be made, was usually made. And we sat down and spoke to the one which resorted there. And a certain woman named Lydia, a seller of purple of the city of Thyatira, which worshiped God, heard us, whose heart the Lord opened. She attended things were spoken of Paul. And when she was baptized, her household, she besought us, saying, if you have judged me faithful to the Lord, come into my house and abide there. And she constrained us. Okay, as we talked about last time, this woman's a Jewish woman. They're down at the riverside because there's not enough Jews in Philippi to make a synagogue. That's what you do. You go to the river and pray. But notice this Jewish woman, it's not just any Jewish woman, she's a seller of purple. Now, purple came from the murex snail. They didn't have indigo like they got from India. They didn't have the indigo. You created purple, and this murex snail had a little sac. And each snail, you squeeze it, it killed the snail. You got one drop of this purple dye. Now the thing about this dye was this: it was reactive to light. So if you did it on a clear day, cloudless day, let's go the other extreme first. If you did it on a dark, moonless night, cloud covered, dark as it can be, when you kill the snail, you got a deep purple dye. All these snails. If you did it on the opposite end, on a cloudless day, in the middle of the day, with the sun full up and everything, you got a sky blue dye, and you could adjust the color of the dye. It came from this secretion from the snail by picking when you killed it, when you squeeze the drop out. You can get anywhere from dark purple to light to sky blue. So the reason why the sky blue is of interest probably of interest to Paul, because it's the same sky blue. The murex snail is what was used to make techelet. Techelet is the Hebrew word for the shade of blue that's used on tzitzits. So this Jewish woman is also making blue dye, and where that came from was here in the law, in Moses. In the Lord's, we'll read it, Numbers 15, 37 through 40. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, speaking of the children of Israel, bid them they make their fringes in the borders of their garments throughout their generation. They put a fringe of the borders, a ribbon of blue, a blue thread. And if you shall, and it shall be unto you a fringe, for a fringe you may look upon and remember the commandments of the Lord to do them. That you may seek not after your own heart and your own eyes, which you used to go a whoring. That you may remember and do all my commandments, and be holy unto the Lord, unto your God. Okay, so this is where this came from. That blue dye, that blue is techelet. It comes from the Murex Snell. And at one point, the Romans decided they only went with the high officials and whatever wearing this, and they outlawed the color blue. That's why some, to this day, some, I believe the Orthodox, their tzitzits, their tallits are black and white, not blue and white. So they substituted black for blue. Well, the interesting thing was, after they did that, the Murex Snell started disappearing, and eventually, it was listed as extinct for well over 2,000. No, I'm sorry, well over 1,500 years. And the Romans lost Tyrian blue, purple, the royal purple of Rome. They took it from the Jews. God took it from them. However, what's interesting is when the Jews, when after the state of Israel was formed, and the Jews started immigrating back to the land, one day, the formerly thought to be extinct Murex Snell was found. Now they're at nuisance level. They were never extinct. God preserved them, which maybe should be a lesson to all of us. Many times we listening to extinct like ivory-billed woodpeckers. It turns out they weren't extinct at all. God preserved them. So that blue connects us to tzitzits, which are part of tallits. Now we're going to look at the next clue here. Not Acts 19:11-12. And God wrought special miracles by Paul, so that from his body were brought into the sick handkerchiefs or aprons, and disease parted from them, and the evil spirits went out of them. Okay, you may have seen a televangelist do this. You get this special anointed prayer cloth and lay it on wherever you're sick. But no, it's not just sickness. Demons also departed. Demons are being cast out. Well, what are these? Notice these things are from his body. So Paul, these are things Paul are touching Paul. They're not just, he doesn't have a stack of these things. He doesn't necessarily have a stack of these things, and he's by ancient mail order, sending them all over the place. They're actually coming off him. Well, what are they? They're handkerchiefs or aprons, and what they are, what they were was we'll look at the details in this in a moment of where it came from. But they're smaller versions of tallits. They're not the tallit gadol, the big Jewish prayer shawl you're used to seeing. They're smaller versions that people could wear under their clothes. That's why it's against his body. And they came in two forms. One was a square form, about maybe 6 to 9 inches by 6 to 9 inches. And on each corner of it, you have the tzitzit with the select thread. The other one went around the waist, is like an apron, like a workman's apron. So Paul is wearing these things. Well, if he keeps giving them away, where's he getting them? He's making them himself. Okay. So where did this come from? These smaller forms of tallits. In fact, today, the rabbis said that has to go around your body, and they modified them. And today they're called talit katan. Where'd it come from? Well, we're going to find the answer to that in Daniel. Daniel spoke ahead of time about the Maccabees. In fact, he was so accurate that one of the critics I was reading about Daniel, their criticism of Daniel was this. Here's the reasoning. It had to have been written after the fact because it was so accurate. What unbelief. No, it was accurate because it really was Daniel really was the Word of God, the one who sees the end from the beginning. Well, let's look what Daniel said here about this era of the Maccabees. We'll start in 11th, and we'll start in 3rd. For the ships of Kittim come against him. Therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the Holy Covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence in them that forsake the Holy Covenant. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people who know their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many. Yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be helped a little help. But many shall cleave to them with flatteries. So, Kittim is Hebrew for Italians. It's Latin. This is the Romans. And the he in here is Antiochus Epiphanes. He has one of those former Greek. He has one of those 4 Greek mini empires called the Seleucid Empire. He's in charge of it. Down south, the king of south is Ptolemy of the Egyptian. The Ptolemy Empire, which is in Egypt, in Egypt. He's up in Syria. Back and forth, they've been going. The Romans show up and put an end to the fighting. Well, he's fighting mad about it. So he takes it out. He doesn't like the Torah, the Holy Covenant. So he takes it out on them. And he finds there's a lot of Jews who don't want to live under it either. They have forsaken it. So they join him and help him help him pollute the sanctuary to get rid of the daily sacrifice and set in place an idol of Zeus with his own face on it in the temple. And these people that do wickedly against the covenant, he has corrupted with flatteries. Mind you, these are Jews, most part. But not all Jews. This is the Maccabees, the people that know their God, and they're strong and do exploits. Now they instructed people among many. But here's the deal. Now, they were helped a little bit with some Gentiles. This is where the God-fearers originally started. The term originally started from. You had strangers under the law who were also God-fearers, but they really get this title here. These are Gentiles who turn to God, don't worship idols, but won't get circumcised for various reasons. So those are the ones helping them against these other Jews who've aligned themselves with this terrible Greek guy, Antiochus Epiphanes. But notice here's the thing about Antiochus Epiphanes. When he did this wickedness wickedly against the covenant, he made a death penalty crime some things, including wearing tzitzit, wearing talits, reading the Torah, circumcision, and in some cases, with compelled to eat pork and if they didn't eat it, they killed them. So because of that, they couldn't go around wearing these big prayer shawls openly. So they made little ones that they could put under their clothes. This is what Paul is wearing. And again, he's giving them away week by week. He's giving them away maybe on a daily basis. Where's he getting new ones? He's making them himself. And we're going to look at one more bit of evidence that Paul, what him, Aquila, and Priscilla made were talits. And that's here in 2 Timothy 4:13. The cloak thou left at Troas with Carpus, when thou comes, bring with thee, in the book, especially the parchments. That word cloak, that word cloak is, okay, all right. Oh yeah, that word cloak is porneos, and it's only used one place in the entire Bible. It literally means like where the word photon comes from. It has to do with light, and it comes from the ideal of being wrapped in light. Well, you can't really wrap yourself in light. Well, the rabbis use this as a reference to the Talit Gadol, the big Talit, the prayer shawl you used to see, and people wrap themselves in it. Because they said when you wrap yourself in that, you're wrapping yourself in light. And the reason why they say it, because you're becoming more like God, closer to God. And the reason why they said it is Psalms 104, 1 through 2. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O my God, you are very great. You are clothed with honor and majesty. Who covers himself with light as a garment and stretches out the heavens like a curtain? So the entire argument here, the evidence points heavily towards Aquila and Priscilla making tallits. His occupation was to make tallits. Now, in some cases, he may have also made some tents, but the tools to make the tallits, he needed the blue threads, which you found a source for from Lydia. The tools were small, could carry them easily. The need for these was everywhere where there were Jews. Which notice he tries to go where there's Jews all the time. So this is his primary occupation. Now it's possible when there was a need arose and he had an opportunity, he could have been making some scenes in larger cities like Corinth that had amphitheaters that needed a scene maker. He could have been involved in the theater on the stagecraft to some degree. And he could have also, in some cases, made tents as well. But his main occupation is making these tallits. Okay, now we're going to resume. Now we've explained his occupation, his work, what kind of work he did. We're going to resume looking in Acts here. Let's see what happens next. Acts 5 through 8. And when Silas and Timothy were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. Say Yeshua is Messiah. And when they opposed themselves in blasphemy, he shook his garment and said to them, your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From henceforth I will go into the Gentiles. And he departed then there, and entered a certain man's house named Justus, one who worshipped God, whose house was hard joined to the synagogue. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord of his house. And many of the Corinthians believed and were baptized. Okay, all right. So Silas and Timothy have caught up to him now. They've gone to Athens. We're told he was here. They've come to Corinth. Now Paul's been leading up to this in the synagogues, reasoning with them. But now he's gonna let go what he's been reasoning, that he's gonna flat out tell them Yeshua is Messiah. Well, they oppose them. Well, same pattern as some. Some believe, some don't believe. Those who don't believe, they blaspheme. Probably like Paul when he swore himself, it said he blasphemed when he spoke ill of Yeshua, he called it blasphemy. So Paul shook his raiment. Now remember, he's not to shake the shoes. This is another form of that. I'm getting the dust from you off me because it's cursed. And he told him, "You're guilty. Your blood. You have brought about your own punishment." Now I want you to notice, I'm clean. I'm not responsible. I warned you. Now notice this, where I go forth into the Gentiles. We've heard this kind of expression before. And Paul does not mean he's never going to talk to Jews again. He's only referring to the Gentiles in this area. He's not going into their synagogue, these unbelieving Jews' synagogue anymore. He said the same thing in Iconium, and the very next thing he did was go to a synagogue. In Pisidia. And the very next thing he did was he went to the synagogue in Iconium. Okay, remember, he's not called just to the Gentiles, but to the Jews also, particularly in the ones living among the Gentiles in the diaspora. So he doesn't mean he's never going to talk to Jews again. He's going to go to Gentiles only. He means in that city. And particularly means he's not going to the synagogue. So, but notice where he goes. He goes to this man, Justus, who's the caretaker. Literally in Greek, it's his heart joined heart. His house shares a wall with the synagogue. He's going next door. We're going to start his own synagogue. You know what? Now, Justus is the caretaker of the synagogue, but over him is the chief ruler, the Arca Synagoga. We talked about before. The synagogue has two equal two people run it equally. One's responsible for the message, the messenger of the synagogue. Sometimes translated as the angel of the synagogue, like the angel of the church in Revelation. The other one's the chief ruler. He's the administrator. He's got to make sure the bills get paid and the grounds get taken care of. And in this case, he farmed out some of that groundkeeping work to this man named Justus. So Paul is starting his own synagogue, literally right next door to the synagogue that just kicked him out. And he took a lot of their staff with him because they believed. Notice these Jews believed. And many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized. And remember, the Corinthians are Jews and Gentiles, Greeks, 50-50. There's other types of Gentiles besides Greeks in Greece, by the way. There's a port not far from it, and there's a slipway, and we'll talk about that later. But most of them are Greeks. So Jew and Gentile are now going to. So we have their case of Paul causing a synagogue split. Paul's been kicked out of a synagogue again. So, like Yeshua said, we're not called to bring peace, but division over him. We're not to go along to get along. So I feel like I've been kicked out of 3 congregations, but because I clung to the Word of God, and I feel like I'm in good company. Let's look at what happens next with Paul. Paul may be a little concerned here. He's had this kind of pattern before. But Acts 18:9-11, he's about to get reassured. Then the Lord spoke to Paul in the night by a vision. Be not afraid, but speak and hold not your peace. For I am with you, and no man shall set on you to hurt you. For I have much people in this city. He continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. All right, he's there 1.5 years. It's been 6 years since his preparation and he went on his first mission. This is a quarter of that time. He's going to be here all the way to 52 AD, which by that point would be 8 years. So this is the longest he's been in one place so far. And he's teaching. And we're going to look at in detail next week while he's teaching, but I'm going to give you a brief overview. And then we're going to look at what kind of work he did there and what kind of ministerial work he did in Corinth. Now we're going to look at a summary of his teaching here. First 1 Corinthians 15:1-4. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I preached to you, which you have also received and wherein you stand, by which you were saved, if you keep in memory what I preached unto you, lest you believed in vain. For I delivered unto you first all that which I also received, how Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and he was buried, and he rose again the 3rd day according to the Scriptures. Okay, so what I taught him was from the Scriptures. The Scriptures, again, doesn't mean the whole Bible that we have. He's referring to the Tanakh, the Old Testament, or I like to call it the original covenant. It's all the Scriptures there is. The only part of the New Testament that's been written at this point is Matthew and Mark, the Gospels of Matthew and Mark. And Paul, while he's in Corinth, is going to write his letters to the Thessalonians. So most of the New Testament doesn't even exist yet. So he's teaching people according to the Scriptures. And we'll look again next week at what he teaches according to the Scriptures in detail. But the main thing is the death, burial, and resurrection of Yeshua was according to the Scriptures. Our faith there, and there's one more thing I want you to notice. He tells them to keep these things he taught them in memory, unless they believe in vain. You can believe in vain. You can believe and it do you no good. It's not faith without works is dead. Okay. So Paul makes it very plain you can believe in vain. Being a believer is not enough. And we'll look some more in detail about that when we look at his teachings deeper next week. Now we're going to look at what at some more about his work while he's in Corinth. Is a ministerial work, not his secular job that pays the bills. Okay, 1 Corinthians 1:14 through 18. I thank God that I baptized none of you but Crispus and Gaius, lest any should say I baptized in my own name. And I baptized also the house of Stephanas. Besides, I know not whether I baptized any other. For Christ sent me not to baptize, but to preach the gospel. With the wisdom of words, not with the wisdom of words, that the cross of Christ should be of no effect. But for the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness. But to us who are saved is the power of God. Okay, so the main thing here is he's preaching the cross, but he's not really in the baptism business. He's in the preaching the gospel business. He's not spending a lot of his time baptizing people. You know, by his testimony here, he's baptized a handful out of what eventually probably turned into thousands. Okay, he baptized 10, 12, something like that himself. That's not what his works. That's not the thrust. That's not his main work. His main work is preaching the gospel and preaching the crucifixion, because the death, burial, and resurrection is what there is no burial and resurrection without the crucifixion. And the crucifixion is according to the scriptures. He's making a point of this. So that's his. Now we're going to look at some more of his work while he's there. Some more things that finds the work is ministerial work. 1 Corinthians 2:1 through 5. And I, brethren, when I came to you, not with excellency of speech or wisdom, declaring to you the testimony of God. For I determined not to know anything among you save Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. My speech and preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in the demonstration of the Spirit and the power. That your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. Okay, we saw on Mars Hill that Paul was able to take on the greatest philosophers of the day and take them out. He totally flipped everything on them. He totally could speak elegantly if he needed to. Perhaps the Holy Spirit fell on him and gave him the right words to say, but Paul could totally do that. However, he kept it simple. He didn't get them all wrapped up in all kinds of side issues and things like people do, where they all kinds of controversy and conspiracy theories and whatever, and fights over philosophy and this kind of thing, because the Greeks among him undoubtedly subscribed to, and perhaps in some case some of the Jews subscribed to these different Greek philosophies. He keeps them focused on Yeshua, the Messiah, and him being crucified. And we would do well to do the same. And he backed that up with demonstration of the Spirit of power. Remember the instruction of Yeshua: preach the word, it'll be confirmed with signs and wonders. Signs will confirm the message. We see that's going on here, like we've seen everywhere else Paul's went to. That's to persuade people. So now we're going to look at another thing about that, another aspect of his ministry work. 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23. For though I be free from all men, yet I have made myself a servant to all, that I might gain more. Unto the Jews I became a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law. To them that are without law, as without law, not being without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men, that by all means some might be saved. For this I do for the gospel's sake. I might be a partaker with you, thereof with you. Okay, so we've already looked at Paul. He's focused on preaching. He's focused on the cross. He's not wrapped up in ceremonial things like baptism. And he's not and he's producing signs and wonders, not relying on philosophy and beautiful sermons. Well, other way he's doing this ministry work is he is relating to people. When he's talking to Jews, he talks to them as Jews. Remember, he's played the Jew card many times. When he comes somewhere new, he looks for Jews. That's who he stays with. He looks for Jews that are worthy, not just Jews that are worthy. Lay his case, killing Priscilla, following the instructions of Yeshua. When he's not talking about under the law, he also addresses them as under the law. He's playing that Pharisee card. But he goes to the synagogue. Remember, Pharisees outside Israel, very rare. People want to hear them. Instant audience, instant platform. And he talks to them concerning the Torah. But those who know nothing, those who are without the Torah, who know nothing about it, he doesn't talk to them about the Torah. As we saw on Mars Hill, he is talking to them about what they do know to bring them there. And notice when he doesn't talk to them about the Torah, he's not living like he doesn't have the Torah. He is under the law. He's under the obedience of the Torah. I had someone ask me once, well, don't you think he would have ate a ham sandwich to get, to make himself more accessible to these people and to get them saved? And the answer is no. Okay? He remained under obedience to the Torah. He plainly says it himself. In the weak, the sick, he doesn't play on his strength. Paul has a genius mind. Okay, there's no doubt about it. He's well educated, and there's many aspects of strength with him, but he doesn't play on those. He humbles himself. And the thing is, he relates to people at where they're at. If there's nothing else, and he's talking to a man, he relates to him as a man. If there's nothing else, he's talking to a woman, he relates to him as a human being. This is part of his work, of how he does his ministry work. And we would be well to do the same, to follow this pattern of work. Now, last we're going to look at his work ethic. Okay. 2 Corinthians 12 through 13. Truly the signs of an apostle were wrought among you in all patience and signs and wonders and mighty deeds. For what wherewith we inferior to churches, if I was not myself not burdened to you? Forgive me this wrong. Okay, Paul has these miracle signs. What they didn't do was have Holy Ghost conferences and collect a bunch of money for himself. Okay? No, he wouldn't even take money from them. And he sarcastically says, forgive me this wrong. He wants them to know he's not after their money. He's after their good, what's good for them. So he will not take money from them at this point. So because he's not after there. So how does Paul manage? He's not taking money from them. Is it just a matter of him working with? Is it just a matter of him supplying all of his own needs, or is he getting some sort of help? We're going to look and see he is really getting some sort of help. 2 Corinthians 11, 7 through 10. Am I committed an offense and abasing myself you might be exalted because I have preached to you the gospel of God freely? I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. When I was present with you and wanted, I was chargeable no man. That which is lacking to me, the brethren which came from Macedonia supplied. In all things I've kept myself from being burdensome to you, and so I'll keep myself. And as the truth is in Christ, is in me, no man has stopped me from this boasting in the regions of Achaia. All right, there's a number of things we need to notice here. Paul, again, he's working 2 jobs. He's working full-time in the ministry, and he works full-time in a secular job to take care of his needs, but it's not enough. Paul is taking some help, and he's taking it from these churches in Macedonia. Now, notice it's Macedonia. It's not Philippi. Remember, Philippi was sending him to him originally. Well, now the other churches in Macedonia, Thessalonica and Berea, have joined in this. Greeks are very competitive. Come on, they invented competitive sports. All right, they invented competition, literally. And eventually, the Thessalonians weren't about to let a bunch of Roman retirees up in Philippi outdo them. So all the Thessalonians were richer and everything else. So they also got in the act, and the Bereans. So now Paul has people outside giving them money, which helps him with these expenses, so he can spend more time focused on preaching, less time on supporting his own needs. Because he's not going to burden the people he's going to. And this is true today. Missionaries do not burden the people they go to. At least at a certain point, they may grow to maturity where they want to start contributing, but they don't ask them to. This is that same pattern, and Paul's the one that established it. And remember, it's part of his strategy. But look how hard Paul has to work to carry this pattern out. And he's boasting about these other people giving them. And why he says robbing other churches is they could have used that money for their own congregational needs. But it's wages. Notice it's wages. This is not money for nothing. Paul is working for this money they're bringing him. He's working in the ministry. So these other churches have their own needs, but money they could be spending on people in their own, giving wages to people in their own ministry, in their own concert, in their own congregations to take care of their needs. They're saying to Paul to help take care of his need, and not just Paul, some other people too. Remember, Silas is down there, Timothy's down there. We got to kill him, Priscilla. We got at least 5 down there right now. And this is like when I grew up. I went to Vacation Bible School in a little place didn't even rate a dot on the map. Savoy, Arkansas. This community of Savoy, for 50 years, sponsored a missionary from that community to India, so she could be free to preach the gospel in India. For a lot of them, this was a real sacrifice. It was hot. It was very hot in the 1970s and 80s, early 80s. And the summers were terrible sometimes. These people did not have air conditioning. They could have bought air conditioning, but instead, they sent that money to help this woman, Miss Luther. So this is the kind of thing we're talking about here. But that also meant their congregation didn't make, and maybe delayed in getting air conditioning for their church building, except. That's what he means by robbing these other churches, these other congregations. So Paul's getting some help. He's able to work, do all this work because he's having some help now. We're gonna look at one more type of help he's gonna get. Acts 1 Thessalonians 1:6 through 10. And you became followers of us in the Lord, having received much affliction with joy of the Holy Ghost. So you were examples of all the believe in Macedonia and Achaia. For from you sounded abroad the word of Lord, not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but also replace your faith towards God is spread abroad. So we need not speak anything. For they themselves show us what manner of entering in we had unto you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the true and living God, and to wait for a Son from heaven, whom he raised from the dead, even Jesus, which delivered us from the wrath to come. All right, notice these right to the Thessalonians. They too have gotten in the act. But notice, they're not just sending money, and it's not just to Macedonia, which is Berea, Thessalonica, and Philippi. They are going to Achaia, which is Athens and Corinth. And they're not just sending money, they're sending people. Remember, some came down with Paul when he left Berea, went back. They've been acting as messengers for Paul. They've been helping out in various ways. So Paul is now the people Paul's been teaching, his work ethic has caught on. They are also working. They are also giving themselves over to the gospel. So this means Paul can get more done. Remember, Yeshua told him there were much people in Athens. He had many people, in Corinth. Paul doesn't have the manpower by himself and maybe as the 400 people to take on much people and be effective. He needs help, and now he's getting it from the people he taught before because they've seen his work ethic, and they are now becoming workers themselves in the gospel. Okay, that's it for this week. Hope that helps you and was edifying. Build up your faith and move you to action. Not just be a pew sitter, but a go-getter. Till next week, shalom.